Well, I'm very happy that you're here and you are in failure. It's not an option, it's a fact. And we will talk about that in a few minutes. So, first of all, this slide. So, my name is Ixchel Ruiz, and let me bring that back. So I'm a Java champion. You hear a slight accent. It's because I'm from Mexico, but I live in Switzerland. So that's how you can contact me. I'm a senior software engineer at Karakun, and I'm a Java champion. I'm a test container champion. So I do a lot of stuff. I have many, many interests, from server-side coding to testing to things that are more into how we work, team dynamics, etc., etc. And today, I'm going to present you one specific topic that is not so technical, but with a technical twist. So, failure. When I say that word, it has a lot of meaning into my life. And most of the emotions that actually bring down, in not only me, in many, many people, are negative ones. When we feel or when we hear the term failure, or when we think that we are losers, it's not a nice sentiment. It's so hard to deal with failure that, in a way, we have tried to avoid it in our lives. So we reject sometimes this feeling of failure. And a little bit of housekeeping. I will present you a lot of information. Most of my slides have a QR code, which is the reference of all the material that I'm going to present. And for example, in this TED Talk, John Bowers, which is one of the most interesting UPS trainers, drivers, he's saying that nowadays, we are so afraid of failure that we have created this culture of good enough. And he's saying this culture of good enough, it's killing people. So he's advocating for us to extract or actually move away from failure or accepting failure and to go and pursue perfection. So his TED Talk that I totally recommend you to see, it's about that. He's saying 1% of failure in my business cost lives. So that's why good enough is not enough for me. And he has this quote, and I find it interesting. He says that the problem with our culture is not that we have high expectations and we don't meet them, that we set up low expectations and we only thrive in them, and thrive with quotes. And the other feeling that I have seen when we are dealing with failure is that in the last years, we have created this sensation of failure and we have interiorized it. Before, and this is what Alan de Botton, who is a philosopher, and I also recommend his TED Talk, he's telling us that in the past, when we saw a person that was not, let's say it, poor or something like that, they were unfortunate people. When now we see people that are not in the best jobs, that are not earning enough money, instead of saying they are unfortunate people, we use the term losers. So now it seems like we are the drivers of our own lives, and if we are not the most rich or the most handsome or the most successful or the most, that sensation becomes part of our identity. So he's actually saying that our view on failure is becoming so dangerous in our daily life. And he's actually mentioning that. Sometimes we pursue this sense of success, or we buy things, or we consume things, or we set our goals, not because of the goal in itself, just because we need to have that sensation of we are making it right. And that also has a lot of problems. But when other people hear failure, they are happy. They're saying, we're not going to hire our next CTO unless it's coming from a start of failure, a string of starts of failures, because we want somebody that has feel failure and now it's doing amazing things. And there's another TED Talk. I promise this is the last TED Talk that I recommend you today. And this is Astro Teller. Astro Teller works for the Moonshot Factory. And this is X, the parent of Google, and is trying to create, the most important projects, the most crazy projects that Google is trying, well, the parent of Google is actually trying to get. Their goal is to take the most interesting projects that affect the largest quantity of the population and try to solve it. So they were, for example, figuring out how to create balloons and to position different kind of network devices alongside the world. They were talking about vertical farming, but high volume vertical farming. And he's saying, how do we actually manage projects at X in the Moonshot Factory? Every single day, all teams are asking themselves, how can we kill our project? That is how they start their day. And if one team is able to kill their project that day, they get vacations. They get a bonus. They get a round of applause during their day in their company. So they celebrate failure, and they're preparing the people that work in this particular company for failure. They want people that celebrate and thrive in failure, but they make it really safe to fail. So I have shown you a little bit with 3 talks about different perspectives of failure. And that was the problem that I had. Like sometimes we celebrate failure, sometimes we reject failure. And in IT, we have our own flavor of failure. So at project level, how do we do projects? How successful are we in IT? Well, in this particular paper by the Harvard Business Review, these 2 authors actually try to measure how risky were our IT projects. I mean, from estimation to execution, are we in budget? Are we delivering with the right specification of features? Well, turns out that IT projects are the black swans. Because not only we are rarely on time, we are rarely on budget, and we rarely deliver what is important or what we promised that we were going to deliver, not only that, it's difficult to estimate. I mean, the average schedule overrun of thousands of projects, because this is a very interesting study based on, I think, 4,000 different projects alongside the world. 70% were overrun. 20% were overrun in costs. So you could say, like, add an extra, add a buffer, add 30% of your budget. The problem with that idea and IT projects is that they don't follow a linear behavior. And that's why that's what the author says. IT projects are black swans. So 1 in 6 is totally going to blow up the budget. So there is no an easy fix to budget correctly. And you can say to me, Ixchel, that particular study was in 2011. Well, they did revise it in 2022. So it's the same authors. And in this case, they come up with several findings. I will tell you one of the findings, but not the second one, because I really want you to read this particular paper. So in 2022, they said, you know what? Remember when we said that it was difficult to model how IT projects behave? Well, now they defined the formula to do that. And in those 10 years, with Agile, with more teams developing software, with better engineers, you would say we're better at, at planning projects. I'm sad to report that that's not the case. We haven't improved a lot. So for example, this is data from the US Department of Defense in 2020. Only 35% of the projects that they were running were inside the budget. The rest, they were already running. And for example, this is from a study by McKinsey and the VT Center of Engineering from Oxford, where they also are analyzing, let me see, I have here. They were checking a project spending of $37 billion, and they were already 45% of them over the budget. So we're not doing better. One of the findings of this particular paper is that they have a specific formula for representing this kind of overrun. And this is a tail fail, and it is power law distribution. That's how IT projects behave. And this is the teaser. And they also figure it out. What is the specific risk factor for IT projects overrunning their budget? But I'm not going to tell you which one it is. So please read that specific paper, and it's really interesting because, as I said, they model how IT projects behave in terms of budgeting, but also it will tell you what is the problem with our designs. So now, failure at the development level. This is easy. Every single day I hear this, and I hear it even more often because I love testing. I have been talking about testing for so long, and there is one particular project that I love. And who has here used test containers? Man, that's great, but I hope next year it's the entire room. It has been my favorite project for some years, but if you don't know what I'm talking about, have a look. So in testing, we always say, fail fast, fail often. Do not trust a test that you haven't seen fail first. And we know testing is super important. So we go back to how I felt. Failure is good, failure is bad, we celebrate failure, we reject failure. So what should be our reaction? I mean, my personality is make a decision, Ixchel. Are you celebrating? Are you hating it? And this ambivalence make me wonder, well, maybe the problem is not if I'm pro-failure or pro-success or against failure or against success. Maybe the problem with me is that there are different types of failures, because not every single failure is the same. So what do we mean by failure? And, oh my God. And I'm so sorry for this. It should be more for you to, actually, I'm not sorry. Because this is the etymology of the word failure. And I don't expect you to read it because at the end of the day, I don't care if you know how it's pronounced in Greek or in Sanskrit or any other language. But what I wanted to point out with this particular slide is, at the beginning, the first definition of failure was something like a lie, like an incredible bad experience that you felt. But in a revised version of the etymology of the word, the original or the spirit of this word was more about a stumble. So the spirit of this word at the beginning was not about something that you fail, you are in a position of disadvantage. The spirit was saying, you stumble, but you didn't even fall into the ground. So it was a very episodic thing. It was not deterministic. Well, it was deterministic, but not, let's say it like that, a final state. So I want you to keep that in mind. Failure had never a connotation that was so tragic. And then I found this particular issue on the Harvard Business Review. This is in April 2011. And they created a full issue on failure. So not only about the definitions, about the types, how different companies have leveraged failure. And there is one specific article and later on book with Amy Edmondson. And she's talking about the different kinds of failure. And she's saying that we can detect 3 types of failures: the preventable ones, the complex related, and the intelligent one. And there are positive failures. So the first one is the preventable failures. And think like, these are the failures that you don't want to make. We already know how things work. It's a process that can be automated. There is nothing to learn here. So for example, if you have or you commit a failure here, there's nothing to be gained. So that's the one that you have to avoid. The next failure is the complex related failure, where she says, there is a moment in any system or any circumstance that you cannot check or foresee all the combinations. There's something new, and you cannot prepare for all the possible scenarios, all the different complexities, even all the matrix of possibilities, so you cannot prepare for that. And it wouldn't be cost effective to do that. So she's saying here what we can benefit or what we can leverage here is to have, for example, checklists. Checklists that verify that the best practices are being taken, that you have a solid foundation, that in case something unexpected happened, at least you're going to fail gracefully. That's the idea. And then finally, this is the failures that we should celebrate. This is the failures that we should look for. These are the failures that are putting us into the new learning patterns. We are breaking with our comfort zone. We're trying to create a new drug. We're trying to create a new feature for our application. We're trying to figure out something new. These are the ones that the industry and the academic says that these are the intelligent failures. And this is another interesting model of failure. When they say, we usually are here in a comfort zone success, and then we try to explore, because we are not moving. We are already where we wanted to be. And when we start to explore and when we'll try to wow, that was a good effect. I touched the wall and that vibrates. That was confusing. Okay, so yeah, that like, oh my God, this is some powers. Okay, anyway, so you explore and then you fail because you're trying something totally new. And then you learn something, and then you are again in the success part. You try something different, and you fail, and you try, and you learn, and you adapt, etc., etc. So now we're seeing that success and failure have this very intertwined relationship. And this brings me to the models. There's another book that I totally recommend you. This is the Failures File, the Perspective on Failures. And this was created after a project called The Glory of Failure. And there was a conference like this one in 2009 with the Royal Society of Arts created this project because somebody mentioned failure, and suddenly from different dimensions, from different industries, different professions, people start talking about failure. And it was so much the material that they decided to edit and compile this particular book. And it is fantastic. So in this particular book, they actually tell us about that. They are interconnected and they are part of our cycle of continuous growth and improvement. And this is the model that I already showed you. The other thing that they mention is that failure, it's a lot of things. Failure is natural, it's universal, it's inevitable. And this is, according also to the book, the DNA of a failure. What is important to mention is that not all the words that they use for referring or defining failure are negative. Because failure is also showing us where to go and which things do not do ever again. And I want to mention this one because there is a specific example that everybody knows, even if they don't know that they know. Does anybody know why Final Fantasy is called Final Fantasy? I'm talking about a video game. Well, Final Fantasy has several chapters, if you know, because I don't remember which one is the last one. And it's called Final Fantasy because the company was going to kill the project. So they decided to call it the Final Fantasy. I mean, after X amount of days, the company is going to be closed. So the developers decided to have fun. This is our goodbye. This is the last thing we're going to do. And what happened with Final Fantasy? It was so successful that it continued for I don't know how many versions. The last one that I played was 13 or something like that. So when we remove that pressure of trying to achieve success, sometimes we are so free of that failure can become our best teacher, the best place to learn, to try, and even to have fun. The other thing that I mentioned is that this is the basic eco cycle of failure and success. So you are in success, you want to improve, you want to learn, you reach failure because you are exploring, you're trying something new. And the only way to make that again a success is by learning or adapting. Because nowadays, we are also glorifying failure and success. I have heard and listened and talked to a lot of people that usually say, well, I'm failing. Now, the next step should be success. Like, by just failing, you get into this success path. And it's not true. Between success and failure, yes, they're interconnected, but what is between them is the learning and the adapting. Now, and this seems very straightforward, logical, and common sense. But turns out that learning from our mistakes is not so easy. And there is one specific problem. The size of the success affects us. If the failure or the size of the failure affect our learning mechanisms. For example, if the failures are too big, we get this negative reaction and we don't learn. So in that particular paper, the authors are asking or suggesting organizations and individuals saying how or what is the best strategy to do that. And what they are saying is If you fail small, you can learn faster, you can apply all these lessons and you move forward. And then the first question that you should be asking is, how do you fail small? That was my first question. I mean, everything is contextual. So the first thing that I say is that there is actually a moment between failure and success that you are not doing either. And this is the acceptable performance. So they suggest you to consider these 2 points in whatever you are doing that brings you this sense of failure, and realize that the best place to start learning is this. So you are diminishing your sensation of failure to the bare minimum, and so you don't have any of the negative factors to improve your learning experience. The other thing that, as I said, is how do you know which is a small failure? And they had a graph, and they have a formula, so how cool is that? But the point here is that how do you measure? And they are saying, well, there is a point where the losses of whatever your decision was is so high that you're going to feel miserable or you're going to block yourself. And there is an amount of room where the losses are acceptable. And this is the sweet spot where you can move around and say, from that point of view, this is my threshold. From here on, I don't accept continue in this direction. But from here, from this point to this one, I can still try, push my limits, and use that information for learning. What are the problems that we face when we try to learn? There are psychological factors, technical and social barriers, contextual factors, and failure characteristics. And yes, my slides are going to be available online because it's a lot of information, I know. So between the psychological factors is the negative emotional response. We feel like a failure, we feel depressed. There is the cognitive bias, the attribution and escalation of, and I totally forgot there, the attribution of process. And the cognitive bias is, there are people that even in the face of something that it's measurable, they still say, nah, this is not a problem. And the escalation is when your bosses say, like, it's not that we're not doing the right thing, we don't have the right people or the right amount of people. That's the other bias. The technical and social barriers, sometimes the technical barrier is that the problem that we're trying to analyze is too complex and we don't understand the system. And the social barriers is usually the blame culture. We don't have in our organizations this environment where we said what went wrong, instead we say who was wrong. So that is a blaming culture, and that's not the best one. The other problem is that we don't have double learning loops in our organization. And let me explain what's a double loop of learning. So when something goes wrong, we say, this is how we should solve this problem. Like, this is the actual efficient way to plug a specific hole. What happens is we are so quick at taking the easiest, in our view, solution that we don't go further enough to the real causes of that specific problem. So this is the single loop of learning. We find a supposed solution, we make it a rule, and now we are victims of simplistic solutions to complex problems. So what they are saying is, don't fall victim of that. Always review the solutions that you have found and make sure that at least you create a double loop of learning. And if you create also some solutions, think that they may not be the right ones. The other problem with failure is that sometimes they don't happen often enough, so we cannot extract enough information to generalize or to really analyze. And I have more material, but I only put it there when you want, if you want to review the slides. Because the first one is going to tell you, well, perfect, you fail, you learn. Let's hope that you learn a lot. How do you bring that learning experience back to the organization? Because remember, we learn also in context of our organizations, and they want us to go into the next level. This order is, well, this is a very interesting study that is going to talk us about how do we treat past experiences and how do we actually improve the group's performance and efficiency. And in this particular study, they figured out that there is a tipping point between learning and actually making use of older learning strategies, and there is a group of people that get stagnant, that they don't learn. And what they found out is the strategies that we use for learning and how fast we apply those solutions is what defines the tipping point. And they increase your return on failure. This is a very simple one, but I totally recommend it you. It's a very short paper, but it's mostly for your upper management. It has very compelling arguments about what are the losses at the organizational level. And I know this is common sense, but the examples that they provide are really interesting. And finally, one of my most deared papers. Amy Edmondson in 2003 coins this term, psychological safety. And most of the topics that we have discussed today in the context of our organization are not possible unless you have an environment of psychological safety. And is there anybody that does not know what psychological safety means? Okay. So a lot of people think that psychological safety is equal to trust, and that's not the case. Psychological safety, and I can explain a little bit why is the difference. Trust is usually something that is developed, or at least that's the definition, between individuals. Psychological safety is something that you develop in an environment, in an organization. So psychological safety, what is providing you is the space to actually voice out your questions, your doubts, or even point out errors without any fear of having any retribution, negative retribution, from your comments. So in this particular paper, Amy goes into 2 different hospitals. And one of these hospitals, it's about prescribing drugs. So when she is compiling all this information about the different teams, she finds out this. She was trying to figure out the frequency of errors creating in drug prescriptions in different teams of nurses in these 2 hospitals. And when she's compiling and reviewing the information, she noticed one pattern. The teams that have the best relationship between the members of the team are reporting more errors. And she's like, how is that? The best teams are making more mistakes. So there was an extra question that she asked about how often do you can voice out your opinions or your questions? one team of nurses said that they could always go to the doctor and ask, is this correct? Is this okay? And when the researchers were interviewing the nurses, they asked, why, like, do you have any problem with this? And they said, no, because this is a life or death situation. So I don't have any problems asking if this is correct. The other team, no, they wouldn't ever dare to question the doctors because they will get bad reviews, they will be singled out. So what Amy later on, and she based a lot of her studies after that, is in exactly this, psychological safety. It was not that they were making more mistakes, if they have the freedom to report the mistakes, and their learning curve was better. So the other teams were only not showing the problems. That didn't mean that they didn't have any problems. So failure and success, after even the formulas, the graphs, even the common sense, the ton of studies that I show you, the different perspective, the anecdotes. If we have a company that celebrates success, we have a company that shies away from success and failure. At the end of the day, the definition of success and failure is yours. And I wanted you to meditate a little bit. What do you feel when you think that you're failing? How do you feel when you think that you're failing? And instead of feeling that your failures are the crushing boulders over your shoulders, I invite you to think that they are the stepping stones for your next moves. And I like this session, to present this session on conference environments where there is no speakers, everybody is a speaker. And that's one of the first questions that I ask. How do you define failure? And how do you define success? And you know how many times people have not been able to answer me. And I said, like, this is not an answer for me. I mean, I'm happy to listen to your definition, but this answer is mostly for you. What is your definition of success? Because Alan, one of the TED speakers that I showed you at the beginning, he said, there's no more depressing thing to know that you are living the life of others. Like, your definition of success is based on the opinion of others. So make sure that your definition of success is yours and only yours. And it's the same with your definition of failure. And I gave you all this information, and I gave myself all this information to know when my reactions were out, literally, of scope. Which ones I should take and embrace, which ones I can totally move into the I should not do this anymore. Regulate my own emotions. And this is what I'm trying to do from now on. Write my own definitions. Really have a deep look into myself. Sometimes it's surprising what you find there. And I hope with this session I have given you a different opinion, at least, or a different option into what is success and failure. And this is something that I really want you to remember. Sometimes what we think is not the case. And This is my other call for action. I love feedback, and this is my manual for feedback. So please, please write to me, tell me how can I improve this particular session, and anything that you want to discuss with me. So thank you very much, and that was failure.